Hey everybody, today I'm going to attempt to try and explain what the Fed is to you. You may have seen this in the news, you may have heard about, interest rates starting to rise, and really what the heck does that mean in the first place? So I'm going to try and explain. I'll be honest, I'm definitely not an expert on this, but as I've gotten more and more interested in, finances and stocks and all this stuff, I hear this come up more and more and more, and so I try and learn about this the best that I can. So I'll try and explain it the best that I can. Um, and well, let's just get right into it. So Jerome Powell is the chair of the Federal Reserve. And basically, what he does is he can tighten the requirements of the money supply or loosen it depending on, what's going on. And unless if you live under a rock, you've probably heard about inflation continuing to go up, and that is the inflation basically is the rise in the price of goods. Typically, they measure from the past month, or like if July this month, right? They look at July of last year to try and see what's going on. Typically, what happens with inflation is there's a lot of times if you have a lot of demand, prices will grow, right? Inflation is just price growth, right? And if everyone has money, like we gave stimulus checks out in 2020 and I think in 2021, well, there's a lot more money going around. There's a lot more people buying bread. There's a lot more people buying TVs. And so what companies will do is they always want to have a little inventory on hand. So instead of selling at the same price and having it run out, they'll just raise the prices a bit. And too much of raising prices by companies is not a good thing because it can get out of control. And it's not like a profit mongering kind of thing or anything else. But basically, what the Fed wants to do is see wage increases at least stay on par or increase faster than the growth of goods, aka inflation. And so, what the Fed does, let me see where I'm going through here. Basically, what they do, there's two different ways that they can. There may be more, but there's two different ways that I know where they control the money supply. And when there's a lot more money, there can be more inflation. And so one of the things they can do is they can require banks to have more money on hand, right? They can have more money. So basically, when I go in and I deposit, let's say $10,000, right? When I deposit $10,000 right now with fractional reserve banking, they can actually turn around and lend $9,000 of that out back into the market. So lend it out for cars or houses or whatever. And so if I was the only one at the bank, right? If I was the only depositor and I went and said, hey, you know what, that $10,000 that I deposited yesterday, I actually want that back, they probably wouldn't have it. Luckily, there's so many different depositors that as long as not too many people ask for their money out as actual cash, then the banks are fine. But when that does happen, that is called a bank run when everyone wants their money out at the same time. You've probably seen pictures of that during the Great Depression back in the 1929, 1930s, that kind of stuff. Now, the other way they can do it is through interest rates. Basically, they can raise that interest rate, and basically they're changing the amount it costs to take on debt. And again, this is not a perfect description, but basically instead of having 2% interest rate for debt, now it's 5.7, right, or whatever the interest rates are now, which I think Fed interest rate currently. So it looks like it's about, yeah, this week it's 5.5. And what's interesting, and please don't get too afraid or anything like this, but I was looking at this spreadsheet. I was looking at this picture, and this is a graph of when interest rates rise, pause, and fall. And so I'm looking, and as you can tell, there's a couple of different recessions actually in here. One is kind of like the 2000 to 2003 when we had the dot-com bust, and basically interest rates rose, they paused, and then they fell. And during this time is when the recession actually happened. Now, when the federal government um, lowers interest rates, basically what they're doing is the cost of debt is now cheaper. When the cost of debt is cheaper, companies will take on risks, right? They'll take on debt and start new projects because they want to be the best company in the market. And it's less risky because debt is cheaper. So basically, they borrow more money when interest rates go lower. And when you have more projects, because you're borrowing more money, you're starting a new project, well, you hire more people, right? When you hire more people, people take that money and they go spend it on whatever, could be an iPhone at Apple, could be groceries at Kroger. You can go to Costco, you can go to Walmart, all these different companies that I invest in. And it's just typical stuff. I mean, I do the same thing. Now, what happens is when interest rates rise, well, then it's less likely that a company is going to take on a new project and or right, so growth slows down, and not only that, sometimes growth actually declines, and when growth declines, that means revenue declines, and then typically you start seeing layoffs with companies. You've seen it all over the news, right? All these different companies are laying off employees. And so when that happens, well, employees get laid off, and then when they get laid off, they spend less, right? And then in turn, again, what happens is that, well, if more and more people are starting to spend less, right? Well, then the companies make less again, and they'll do more cost cutting measures or more layoffs, right? And so that's basically the vicious cycle and how the Fed tries to intervene, right? Because a company makes less money, they lay off people, the people get laid off, spend less money, the company makes less money, then the company lays off people, and the more people that got laid off, the like more and more people are spending less money, and it's just like a vicious cycle. But what happens is the federal government then lowers rates like it did in 2008 to try and spur more economic growth. So instead of having to, being charged 5% for debt, now they're getting charged less than 1% for debt, right? They're getting charged less than 1%. And it's like, okay, well, I'll take on some new projects and hire some more people on. And we saw the bull market all the way up until 2020. And then interest rates started to rise again. The thing I will say is that, I mean, we had a pandemic, so I don't think the Fed was, I mean, the Fed doesn't even know if they're going to raise interest rates until they have like a meeting and everyone votes. And once everyone votes, then they know where they don't. So I think this one was a little bit of fluke. But again, in 2020, what happened? We had like 10% unemployment rate. And then all of a sudden, well, what the Fed do? They lowered interest rates again to spur economic growth because basically, when you borrow money, it's risky, but when you're borrowing it at less than 1%, that's less risky than borrowing it at say 2.25, right? 2.5%. And so the scary thing is, and I don't want you to get scared too much, because if the Fed could predict when the economy was going to do well and do bad, they would be billionaires. They're not. No one truly ever knows, but I'm just looking at this pattern going, okay, they really raise interest rates here. And then this is, they raise interest rates. And when interest rates starts to fall, basically that's when the recession is typically happening. And then when interest rates were falling again, right? This is basically where, this is where the recession was. And so, and again, I think this one's a little bit more of a fluke, but what I'm, in the future is like, when do they pause and when do they decline? Because that's when, you know, manure hits the fan, so to speak. And I think we've had some of the fastest rate hikes ever. We've gone up 4.8% in over 14 months. And the last time we even got close to 4% was right here. And that was from '04 to '06. And that was in 24 months. So that was over 2 years versus basically a little over a year. And we went a lot more. So it's aggressive rate hikes again in order to bring down the cost of goods growing. When grocery stores, I mean, I think we had all these different stories about eggs going crazy out of control as far as prices go. And that's basically the Fed. I know this is not like a perfect description, but I'm trying to do the best that I can because it's all over the news right now. And basically what the Fed does, they can tighten or loosen the money supply in the market. And they do that by raising interest rates or telling banks, hey, you actually have to keep out of every $10,000 that worried the wealthy deposits, you have to keep now 50%, right? Instead of only having to keep 10%. But when you loan less money out, well, then there's a lot less growth. A lot less growth means a lot less jobs, which means a lot less spending. And you kind of see the cycle that it keeps going on, right? The other thing that is kind of interesting, I'll make it a little bigger, is the money supply. And I don't necessarily know how to read this in a sense, but I guess the last time that really had less money, right? There's growth where there's a lot more money in the economy, and when there's less, there's like recessions and stuff like that. And we haven't been there since 1932, and now we're here. So I wouldn't put too much into it. This is where the stimulus checks went out, the biggest growth in money. So maybe this is actually a good thing, and just don't think correlation means causation, right? But it is something to keep in mind. Um, so yeah, that's basically it. That's my imperfect example and description of the Fed. I hope you learn more. If you guys have any better descriptions, leave them in the comments below. Please subscribe if you guys like this video, and we're coming out with more and more videos. And of course, you guys know Camper would really appreciate it. I'm probably gonna have to update this. You guys probably want a new picture of her, but yeah. Until next time, thanks for watching, and until then, we'll talk to you next time. Happy investing.